Top of the hour. Good morning, everyone. I'm Poppy Harlow in New York.
And I'm Jim Sciutto. The breaking news this morning, and it's breaking quickly. The days of playing nice are done. That is the word, according to a source from the president's impeachment team, as the EU ambassador Gordon Sondland told last minute not to testify this morning. The order coming down from the State Department right before his planned closed-door deposition for 3 House committees today. That testimony not happening anymore.
So Democrats are now accusing the White House of obstruction for withholding evidence from this impeachment inquiry. They say that includes also unreleased text messages on a personal device of Sondland's that are, quote, deeply relevant, according to Adam Schiff, and also testimony. Sondland was set to answer questions about his role in the president's dealings with Ukraine, including trading a White House visit for investigations into the Bidens. Let's go to Capitol Hill. Our senior congressional correspondent, Manu Raju, is there. Manu, what is the next step for Democrats?
Well, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff came out criticizing this move by the administration to block this witness from coming forward. He detailed why he believed Ambassador Sondland could provide key testimony about the president's efforts to urge the Ukrainian government to investigate Joe Biden, about the talk about why that military aid was suspended, about the talk about this meeting that the Ukrainian government wanted to have in Washington. And he said that essentially that any efforts to obstruct their witnesses could be used against them. In other words, perhaps in an article of impeachment, which is what Democrats have been warning, that perhaps they're not going to go down the route of prolonged litigation, instead move quicker to the notion of impeaching this president, just a 3rd time in American history. Now, just moments ago, after Ambassador Sondland surprised this committee by that announcement that he would not appear under the State Department's direction, Adam Schiff made clear that the Democrats wouldn't stand for it.
We consider yet additional strong evidence of obstruction of the constitutional functions of Congress, a co-equal branch of government.
Now, Schiff would not take questions afterwards. I tried to ask him what the next step exactly is. Will they go to court? He would not take questions. Now, Republicans did come out afterwards. Their contention is that this was not, in their view, a fair process. They said while they believe Sondland should have come, they said that they understand his reason for not doing so. One reason why is because Kurt Volker, the former envoy in Ukraine, he came out last week. They released text messages. The Republicans said they should have released more, and they called that not a fair process. And also, notably, Jim and Poppy, I asked whether or not any of them had concerns when Trump asked foreign governments to investigate his political rivals. Jim Jordan said the president was just doing his job. Guys.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, Manu, thank you very, very much. The State Department is really staying very quiet this morning about all of this, and it was their decision to stop Sondland from testifying. Kylie Atwood covers the State Department. She joins us this morning. We saw with our own eyes Mike Pompeo walk away, turn his back on reporters asking questions about this. Any more intel from the State Department itself?
Yeah, the State Department has remained largely silent this morning and throughout the last few weeks. I think it's important to note that this news came to us from Ambassador Sondland's personal lawyer. And I just want to read you the statement that we received this morning that broke this news that he was being prevented from going forth for his deposition on the Hill. It said from his attorney, Ambassador Sondland is profoundly disappointed that he will not be able to testify today. Ambassador Sondland traveled to Washington from Brussels in order to prepare for this testimony and to be available to answer the committee's questions. Arrangements had already been made with the Joint Committee staff regarding the logistics of his testimony. Ambassador Sondland believes strongly that he acted at all times in the best interests of the United States, and he stands ready to answer the committee's questions fully and truthfully. So, Poppy, we did receive some sort of indication last week from Secretary Pompeo that this might be coming. He wrote a letter to the Hill saying that there were questions about the legal authority that the Hill was forcing upon these State Department officials to compel them to come forth and talk to them because they had not subpoenaed these officials. So now does the Hill go forth and issue subpoenas? Potentially. But it appeared at the time that they had kind of worked through their issues. There were dates that were put on the table. They pushed those dates back. And then just last night, Chairman Schiff said that the House was in discussions with the legal advisor at the State Department, who gave no indication that this was going to be halted in any way. So clearly, this was a very last-minute decision that the State Department made. And I think it's important to note that Ambassador Sondland said in his statement that he hopes that this is going to be resolved quickly. But we are really learning no more from the State Department yet this morning.
Carly Atwood, thanks very much. As we were noting there, we've learned the White House was engaged in late-night discussions about blocking Ambassador Sondland's testimony. Jeremy Diamond at the White House this morning. Jeremy, I wonder, it looks like this order came down from the White House, does it not, as opposed to from the State Department? Because the State Department was making preparations, and after all, the ambassador flew back from Europe to be here this morning to give that testimony.
That's right, and what we're hearing is that this is really part of a broader impeachment strategy, which is, of course, being run by the president and his team of lawyers, both at the White House counsel's office and also his personal lawyers. And what we're being told is that this is indeed part of a broader strategy. There were discussions late last night between administration officials to discuss essentially how much they want to cooperate with this House impeachment inquiry. We know that this White House has been pressuring House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to move forward with a formal vote on the House floor to formally create this impeachment inquiry. The House Speaker has been adamant that she doesn't need to do that, but this White House has been trying to pressure House Democrats to do so, in particular to get some of those vulnerable House Democrats to actually put forward a vote and put their name yes or no in favor of this impeachment inquiry. So there's a political dimension to this as well. But I think it's interesting, one of a source familiar with the impeachment discussions told our colleague Jim Acosta that the days of playing nice are done, and that is certainly the message from this White House. We also saw that in a tweet from the president this morning, where he's continuing to attack this House impeachment inquiry. Jim.
Jeremy Diamond, thank you very much. Let us know if you get any more updates from the White House. Our CNN legal analyst Jennifer Rogers is still with us. Shahil Kapoor, political reporter at Bloomberg, joins us, and Lynn Sweet, Washington bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times. Lynn, let me begin with you. We just had Congressman Mike Quigley on, obviously from Illinois, and he said that he believed that the next step, he wasn't sure, but he surmised that the next step among Democrats on the Intelligence Committee, et cetera, would be to subpoena Sondland, and if you get nowhere with that, you hold in contempt. I mean, what choice at this point do Democrats on that committee have?
Well, they don't have much choice, and I talked to Representative Quigley yesterday, too, on this very topic of what I anticipated of White House stonewalling. What the Democrats don't have right now is the game plan to back up what we should now realize, that no one of note is going to come testify or cooperate with the Democratic-led House impeachment inquiry. If there is any doubt that President Trump is calling this shot, just look at the tweet he sent out a few minutes ago, where he said, "I'd love to send Sondland, but unfortunately it's a kangaroo court." Now, when you take stonewalling to this degree, you're dealing with something that is unknown procedurally, and that's where the Democrats have to figure out what to do. Subpoenas, got it, next step, like Congressman Quigley said, then you hold in contempt. But that doesn't get you the information.
Yeah.
So they have to figure out a new strategy, ball back in Democrats' court.
So, Hill, let's talk about the politics here. You have this new Washington Post poll showing, and we've watched this support, public support for
moving in favor of impeachment and a lot of independents moving in favor of impeachment, and that's where we get to a net 20-point support for the House Democrats' impeachment inquiry. But Republicans have not moved much, and this is really key because this gets to the president's strategy. It's less a legal strategy to deal with it. It's more of a base-first PR strategy, and as long as Republicans feel in the neighborhood of 80 to 90% against this impeachment inquiry, as long as his support, his job approval remains at 80 to 90%, it's very difficult to see any kind of conviction happening in the Senate, which is ultimately required to remove the president from office.
Yeah.
It's a very good point. So let's everyone listen to the part of Adam Schiff's comments this morning that struck Jim and I the most. Here it is.
We are also aware that the ambassador has text messages or emails on a personal device which have been provided to the State Department. Those messages are also deeply relevant to this investigation and the impeachment inquiry.
Jennifer Rogers, two-pronged question. Deeply relevant messages that the public hasn't seen yet, and it isn't clear if Schiff's committee has seen them. And also something on a personal device, moving a conversation, it sounds like, to a personal device. What do you make of it?
Well, you know, it sounds very much like there were conversations that they wanted to take offline because they didn't want people to know about them, right? And if you follow the texts that have been released, you can see exactly where that happens. They're talking about the tit for tat or the quid pro quo, if you will, and then, you know, someone says, oh, you know, let's take this offline, let's have a call instead. And then there's this big period of about 5 hours or so where there's no conversation on the official government communications devices, which tells you they were talking about it in some other way, and it sounds like maybe the personal device is the way. So I think whether or not Schiff and his committee have seen these actual texts, it's pretty clear that his statement that they're highly relevant seems to be true. Yeah.
But reading the politics here, I mean, Sahil makes a good point that this is a base-first kind of PR strategy, not a legal strategy. But how does that PR strategy work here? I mean, if you have a positive story to tell, you don't block a key witness from testifying, you don't hold back emails and text messages. I just wonder if it's possible that could backfire on the president and Republicans if Americans see them to be stonewalling here.
Was that for me, Jim?
Who are you addressing?
Oh, sorry, that's Lynn. Lynn, I was quoting your wisdom, Sahil, but going to Lynn for her wisdom.
Okay, so that's for me. Well,
Yeah.
one of the beefs that President Trump had on his Twitter feed this morning is that no one is reporting, but in fact we have, this is how we know it, that Sunderland said in a tweet, that you're interpreting whatever's going on wrong, nothing untoward is going on. So one of the things you could do, President Trump, if you think this message needs to be amplified, then you have Sunderland come and say it again. If there is another story to tell, everyone wants to hear it. This is not a kangaroo court. If there is another side, exculpatory material, mitigating material, maybe people misinterpreting things, maybe it's not what you think, that's the whole point of why I call this an impeachment inquiry. Let's put the inquiry part of this first. Inquiry, impeachment. It's not so hard, and maybe people will understand that if he had a tweet that puts this in a different light, come and explain it.
Yeah.
I would just like to know, Sahil, just back to you on your point about Republicans. I hear what you're saying overall, but our new polling today does show some movement among Republicans. It shows that Republicans moved from 7% support for an impeachment inquiry in July to 28% in today's Washington Post poll. And I know 28% is not 55%, but that's movement, and it's not just a few percentage points.
Yeah, look, it's an important point. It's a key number to watch. If that number moves to a critical mass, and I don't know what that is, but 33%, 40, 50%, whatever the case may be, that is the key number to watch in terms of what's likely to happen in the Senate, because that chamber is majority Republican. It is full of members in small red states where President Trump is very popular. So if you want movement in terms of a House impeachment inquiry is something that the president cannot stop. Democrats have the votes to do that. Now, I think you're going to see a back and forth where Democrats are going to accuse the president of trying to cover something up, of being afraid of what Sondland might say by refusing to testify, and he's going to continue to attack the investigation, try to undermine the investigators, and say this is all political. So that is going to be the context of the debate in which we might or might not see the Republican numbers move.
And we do know, Jennifer Rogers, that from a legal perspective, that Democrats, and they said, Congressman Quigley said that to us on the air, that there are going to be multiple obstruction, if not multiple obstruction articles of impeachment, multiple cases of obstruction cited in an article of impeachment, and something like this added to that list.
That's right, because what you really want to show is a pattern of behavior, right? You don't want to just show one instance where they stonewalled because maybe there was kind of an excuse for that. You really need to show that time and time again they've been obstructing this all along, which is why the quote about it's time to stop playing nice, I mean, when were they ever playing nice?
That's what Quigley said to us.
I know.
Literally every
a
step
little
of the way
going on to that. Yeah.
They have not been, proceeding with any sort of good faith in this inquiry. And so really need to line all those.
I did see someone to a hostile orchestration.
Thank
Jennifer,
you. Yeah.
all you smart, wise people, thanks very much. We know we will have you back. There's a lot to digest still to come this hour. We continue to follow the breaking news this morning. Trump administration blocking the testimony of a central witness, really, in the impeachment inquiry. We're going to talk potential next steps with a member.
Backlash over his handling of northern Syria. The question remains, why are so many Republicans staying silent on the phone call?
We're following breaking news this morning, and it's moving quickly. The White House blocking EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland from testifying to Congress just minutes before he was supposed to appear on Capitol Hill. He flew in from Europe for this testimony. He was set to testify behind closed doors as part of an ongoing impeachment inquiry into President Trump, specifically about his interactions with Ukraine. Democratic House Intelligence Chairman calling the move to keep Sondland from speaking to lawmakers, quote, strong evidence of obstruction. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Steve Cohen of Tennessee. He sits on the House Judiciary Committee, which would have a very central role in any ongoing impeachment investigation. Congressman, we appreciate you taking the time this morning.
Nice to be with you.
So you have the White House firing a shot across the bow here, refusing testimony. Possible that this will be the first of many cases of stonewalling here. I'm just wondering how Congress enforces its power of oversight. I mean, they can issue a subpoena, but the White House has shown no hesitation defying subpoenas. What are Democrats going to do to get the witnesses they need to proceed with this inquiry?
Well, the only power we have is subpoena, which is under power of law, Latin for subpoena. And that has to go to the courts, and the courts have been slow. The administration has slow-walked it, continued, appealed, and in certain more powerful contempt efforts to bring somebody and charge them with contempt, the Attorney General, Bill Barr, would have to be the prosecuting attorney, and he's not going to prosecute. So he kind of puts us in a difficult position.
So how do you get out of that position? What do you do? What do you do? I mean, because there's a danger of being stymied here, right? And that the White House wins this game.
Well, there's some talks about inherent contempt and being able to use that, but there have to be procedures set up, and the leadership has moved in a very conservative and manner, and so I don't know if that's been developed or not.
Well, I ask again, I mean, we spoke to a member of the House Intelligence Committee in the last hour, Mike Quigley, and he made the point that if this continues, it will stymie Democrats' efforts to establish evidence here of potential wrongdoing, impeachable offenses regarding the president's interaction with Ukraine. I mean, he does say it gives him more evidence of obstruction, but he granted that it gets in the way of getting to the bottom of this. And I'm just curious what the strategy is. It sounds like Democrats are still trying to develop a strategy.
Well, I think we are, and I think the judiciary had the same problem. We were stonewalled. People refused to comply with subpoenas. We've gone to court on contempt case citations, but the courts are still ruling or they've been appealed. But I think all of this does show obstruction of Congress, and that can be a charge in itself. And I think that what they're doing is certainly contributing to obstruction of justice. And somebody who's not guilty, you know, Trump said during the campaign that people who plead the fifth are like the mafia. But when you don't give an oral deposition to Mueller, that's kind of like not pleading that's kind of like pleading the fifth. And when you don't show up to testify or you don't comply with subpoenas, that's kind of like pleading the fifth. They are doing everything they can not to testify, not to be subject to cross-examination, not to have to testify to the American people and their representatives. That's indices of guilt. And overall, you can use that, I think, to show guilt, and that can come forth in an impeachment hearing.
Okay. In the same category, you might say, is Adam Schiff revealing this morning that there are text messages and emails on a private device of Ambassador Sondland that the State Department has and is withholding. I wonder how central you think those texts and emails are, and do you have an issue with, I mean, just imagine what we were talking about in 2016, but using a private device for official communications?
I think that there was a reason why that was done, just like the ambassador told Volker, I believe it was, call me on that one, or find another means of communication.
He said, call me, don't text back. Yeah, exactly.
Right. He didn't want to leave a trail, and that's more indices of guilt and bad conduct.
Okay. The Democrats have an aggressive, ambitious timeline for completing an impeachment inquiry. There was some talk of having it all wrapped up by Thanksgiving. Here we are, October 7th, 8th, and you have the White House stonewalling on key interviews and documents and emails and text messages. Can you keep to that timeline?
If we do, it's going to have to be an abbreviated amount of facts that we give that are available for the Senate to present in a trial, and that may be what some senators use as their excuse not to vote guilt, is the fact that the proof wasn't adduced. But again, there's common sense tells you there's guilt all over this White House. They refuse to comply. They refuse to give depositions. They say, Trump said, I want to talk to Mueller. Then he didn't. And then when he gave a deposition, about a third to a half of his answers, I don't remember and I don't know. That's not being open with the public. And then today he tweeted just an hour ago, I want Sondland to testify, but it's a kangaroo court. That's all hooey. That's all hooey. This is all hiding the truth, hiding the facts, and dodging.
Before you go, Congressman, we have some new reporting from our Pamela Brown saying it is clear that the White House counsel's office is directing other government agencies. It advised the State Department to block Sondland's testimony. What's your reaction to the White House counsel's office telling the State Department that this ambassador cannot testify in defiance of Congress?
Well, the White House counsel has done this over a period of time, and they've filed proceedings on behalf of Trump. The court in New York basically said that their claim that they were beyond being investigated or being in the state court was just hooey. It was just a joke, and it was repugnant to the Constitution. What we see and what we saw yesterday with Trump saying that he had the greatest wisdom and the most, in his infinite wisdom or great wisdom, some quote like that, we're seeing the Wizard of Oz being played out for the American public. He thinks he's the wizard. The wizard said he was the powerful and the great. He was the powerful and the terrible. Trump saw the Wizard of Oz once too much. He's more like the scarecrow than he is the wizard.
All right, or the man behind the curtain, Congressman Steve Cohen. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. And this morning, Republicans continue to stay mostly silent on President Trump's call to investigate Biden, but it is keeping their heads down and this ahead of an impending Turkish invasion. The president's move came in spite of strong opposition from several top Republicans, including Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Their criticism very noteworthy, especially since most Republicans have stayed silent on another key issue, the president's public call for foreign governments to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden, and his son, Hunter. Doug Heye is here, Republican strategist, former RNC communications director, and our political commentator. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning.
So you ran comms for the RNC. You were the deputy chief of staff for communications for former House Majority Leader Eric Cantor. Would you advise such stunning silence?
Well, I think it depends on the issue. What we saw yesterday with a lot of Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, coming out on the issue with the Kurds and Turkey, that's an issue, that's a policy issue. Republicans feel comfortable doing that.
No, I hear you, and I meant on the phone call, but the phone call, I mean...
Yeah.
That's about such a critical thing to our democracy. Like, do we ask foreign governments to interfere or not? So how is that not a policy issue?
And look, that should be low-hanging fruit, as should be, and I say this as somebody who helped set up the Benghazi committee. If Democrats said we're not testifying to the Benghazi special committee, obviously Republicans would have had a real problem with it. There's a silence right now. I find it troubling, but I also find it understandable, having worked in communications roles on the Hill, where your job is to protect your boss. Your job is to make sure that your boss gets reelected. And what we see, we often hear about Republicans having problems in primaries. Having worked for Eric Cantor, I know that's true. But there are also potential problems in general elections if you're running in swing districts or really swing states in Senate races, where you don't get any reward from your base if you speak out against Trump, and you don't really get any political reward from Democrats or independents if you do so as well. So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't as well. And it's as a staffer why I know a lot of Republican staffers on the Hill are getting requests for interviews and sliding into the trash can and telling their boss, we didn't get any requests today, I'll let you know about tomorrow.
Okay. So imagine that self-preservation matters in politics in Washington for both parties here. But I wonder, as you see the polling change on this, you have the Washington Post poll out this morning. Now 58% of Americans say they support the impeachment inquiry. That's up dramatically, up 21 points in just 2-3 months now. But what notable, our David Chalian noted this, that among the GOP, that as you know has been rock solid behind this president, support for impeachment has gone from 7%, negligible, to 28%. Still a minority, but that's a big jump among Republicans. Do Republican lawmakers see those numbers and start to reconsider?
Not yet. They will if we see that in 2 or 3 more polls. Right now, we want to know, is that an outlier or is that a trend? If we get that answer, you might begin to see some more cracks. Look, obviously, Mitt Romney came out very forcefully over the weekend. That gives more permission. Members shouldn't need permission, but the political reality is that's what they look for them to speak out. And if you do, you'll see 1 or 2, and then maybe the dam will burst. But I would tell you, again, having worked on the Hill and sometimes hidden interview requests from my own bosses in the past, you're not going to see a lot of Republicans speaking out because, you see members speaking out in favor of Trump. Members look at that negatively and say, I don't want to do that. And they are very mindful that you don't score points with Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't give points. He only takes them away one at a time.
Doug Heye, you never hid requests from Poppy and I assume.
I used to like you, Doug.
Never. Absolutely not.
All right,
and I would say that to everybody.
Let me get your take. Fingers crossed behind your back. Let me get your take on this. The LA Times piece this morning that was striking. It was interesting to me. The headline: Why Republicans May Want a House Vote on an Impeachment Inquiry and Pelosi doesn't. And it reminds us of the history that in the Nixon and Clinton impeachment proceedings, the majority gave the minority the right to subpoena. Now, those subpoenas were also party to a vote, but it gave them that power. And what it's suggesting here is that Nancy Pelosi is essentially scared of giving that power to the minority because they could, say, subpoena Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point to make. And if you look at, it's troubling when you have people not showing up when they've been subpoenaed to hearings, and it should be troubling whether that's a Republican House or a Democratic House or regardless of what party the administration is in. But also, I think if you looked at hearings over the past few weeks, they've been terrible for Democrats. They've been terrible for Republicans, obviously terrible for the country. We've not learned the information that we need to. I'd love to tell you that there's a good, clear path forward, but I just don't see it right now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Goodness gracious.
Uplifting, sorry.
Doug Heye, thank you.
That's my mantra.
That is his mantra.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, much more on that breaking news. The Trump administration's blocking the testimony of a key Rudy Giuliani to now testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Armando Raju live now to explain. Of course, Republicans control those committees in the Senate. So does this happen, and how do Democrats respond?
It could certainly happen now that the Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham has made clear that he's inviting Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal attorney, to testify before his committee. Now, he said in a series of tweets that he wants to give Giuliani the opportunity to answer questions. So there's not a subpoena, but there's an invitation for him to come. So ultimately it will be Giuliani's decision. And Giuliani just responded to our colleague Michael Warren saying, love Lindsey, but I am still a lawyer and I will have to deal with privilege. But he also says, given the nature of this invitation, about my concerns, I might be able to do it without discussing privileged information. Now, House Democrats have so far resisted the notion of bringing forward Giuliani to testify. They have not gone down that path yet because, in part, they're concerned about a spectacle being happening if Giuliani were to testify, something that they, at the moment, have sought to avoid. But they have subpoenaed Giuliani for documents to be turned over by next week, all about his efforts to urge the Ukrainian government to investigate the Bidens. There's no indication that Giuliani will comply with that. Plus, there are 3 Giuliani associates who have been scheduled to come for interviews and also asked to turn over documents. And those individuals have not complied yet with the House Democrats' request. So Giuliani perhaps may work with a Republican chairman, answer questions in that committee. But, of course, Democratic senators would have an opportunity to ask questions of Giuliani as well. But just the latest development here is a sign of how Republicans are trying to get involved and trying to push back and defend the president. And one way they believe doing so could be bringing Rudy Giuliani forward. But, of course, that's a big risk, too.